6 unclassified ships dropped out of microspace directly inside the enemy fire lanes. The Krell hegemony calculated a standard victory, but these new vessels rejected the mathematical ratios entirely. They did not form defensive ranks. Instead, the lead human ship accelerated straight into the plasma stream, its weapons charging as the sky burned. White-hot plasma cut through the lateral hull plates with a deafening screech, yet the ship pressed forward. It was a suicide run by any known metric, but the weapons did not stop charging. Would you have run from the math, or would you have built a heavier hammer? Because Captain Vance didn't run. Stay close. 30 days before the blockade broke, the navigation array of the Iron Will went dark. Captain Clara Vance held the command console with 3 fingers of her left hand as the ship shook. The hegemony ambush had stripped away 3 primary power cores, leaving the crew with less than 9 hours of air. Vance watched the main monitor as the vessel plunged through the clouds of an unclassified industrial planet. The metal hull groaned against the air, pulling the ship down toward a vast frozen plain. The cruiser hit the mud at 300 kilometers an hour, plowing a trench through the sub-zero fields before sliding to a halt. Smoke rose from the ruptured hull, illuminated by the headlights of local civilian trucks. A wide-shouldered human mechanic named Marcus stepped onto the shattered airlock ramp. He wore oil-stained overalls and held a heavy steel crescent wrench with a notched handle. He did not look at the alien crew with fear. He looked at the smoking machinery. "Your main cooling line is split," Marcus said, pointing his wrench toward a hiss of steam. Vance stepped down the ramp, her uniform singed with plasma ash. "The automatic valves failed. The pressure will destroy the entire reactor grid in 10 minutes. Marcus did not wait for an order. He climbed onto the shaking reactor housing, threw his weight against the manual bypass lever, and struck the jammed valve with his wrench. The heavy steel tool hit the casing with a sharp metallic clang. The valve snapped shut, and the high-pitched scream of escaping gas died down to a low rumble. He wiped grease from his forehead with the back of his hand and looked up at Vance. "Everything has a function," Marcus said, tapping the notched handle of his wrench. "If you know what it's meant to do, you can fix it even when it's burning." He reached down to a large insulated container on his belt and poured a dark, bitter liquid into a scorched tin cup, handing it to the captain. "Drink this. It's coffee. You look like you've been running on dead batteries." Vance swallowed the bitter liquid, feeling the heat move through her chest. Before she could ask about the primitive tool, 3 heavy military transport vehicles tore through the perimeter fences. Colonel Sterling stepped out of the lead transport, his boots sinking into the frozen mud. He looked at the alien warship and then at Marcus, who was already sketching structural diagrams on a grease-stained piece of cardboard. "We have a logistical node set up 5 miles from here," Sterling said to Vance. "The Krell are hunting your fleet and this sky isn't safe. My teams are moving your ship under the rock." Heavy tracked cranes hooked onto the frame of the Iron Will. Vance watched the humans work without standard atmospheric shields, using heavy steel cables and raw engine power to drag the cruiser into a massive hangar carved into an asteroid core. Inside the facility, a civilian propulsion architect named Dr. Aris walked beneath the exposed framework of the ship. She held a digital scanner but preferred to run her bare hands across the scorched alloy. "The hegemony builds these ships to look clean," Aris told Vance as teams of welders began cutting away the outer hull. "But your armor is rigid. When a plasma bolt hits it, the structural shock travels through the whole frame until the welds snap." "It is designed to absorb the strike," Vance countered. "It's designed to break beautifully," Aris said. She pointed to stacks of heavy, dull gray metal plates being unloaded from the military transports. "We are installing composite plating. It doesn't absorb the energy. It intentionally fractures on impact to disperse the force sideways. It looks ugly, but you survive the hit." Vance spent the next 2 weeks watching the humans dismantle her ship. They did not follow the official Valen repair manuals. When a part did not fit, Marcus used his heavy crescent wrench to bend the bracket into place. When the energy distribution networks through an error code, Dr. Aris bypassed the safety regulators entirely, linking the primary plasma drives directly to human electromagnetic accelerators. "This is unstable," Vance said, looking at the fluctuating power readouts. "The original architects stated that overloading the cores by this margin guarantees an internal cascade." "The galaxy operates on numbers," Marcus said, tightening a bolt on the main conduit line. "Humanity operates on mechanics. Your architects never had to fight with a broken wrench." Colonel Sterling entered the engineering bay and signaled to Vance. "Captain, the tracking arrays just picked up a Krell movement. 1,000 new targets are moving toward the Rim 7 blockade. Your high command is preparing to sign the surrender metrics." Vance walked alongside Sterling into the deepest chamber of the command center, known as the Aegis Bastion. The walls were not made of alloy. They were raw granite, carved out by generations of mining drills. As the primary tactical screen lit up, Vance stopped. The underground facility did not just hold radios. Thousands of massive kinetic rail arrays were mounted inside the rock faces, aimed directly at the upper atmosphere. "You built all this before first contact?" Vance asked. "We don't build shelters to hide in, Captain," Sterling said, his voice flat. "We build structures to ensure our production lines keep running while the sky is on fire. We knew someone would eventually come out of the dark. We just didn't know what language you'd speak." Vance looked at the human historical data flashing on the secondary monitors. 10,000 years of civil war, global sieges, and mechanical adaptation filled the screens. This species had never experienced an era of absolute peace. They had spent their entire existence turning industrial tools into weapons of survival. When you break a human ship, they don't look for a white flag, they look for a heavier hammer. "The Krell hegemony calculates what is acceptable to lose," Vance said, her eyes reflecting the blue light of the tactical grid. "We focus entirely on what must be built to win." "Charge the cores." Dr. Aris threw the primary switch, and the modified plasma drives let out a high-pitched whine that vibrated through the granite floor. The iron will rose from the hangar deck, its sleek lines hidden beneath the heavy, blocky layers of human composite armor. 6 unclassified human Vanguard ships rose alongside it, their hulls unpainted and their railgun barrels extending past their bows. Vance stood on the bridge of the Iron Will, holding her scorched tin cup as the ship entered the jump current. The hybrid tactical screens showed the Rim 7 blockade ahead. 50 Krell battleships held the sector, their violet targeting arrays projecting an absolute victory matrix against the approaching Alliance forces. The hybrid fleet dropped out of microspace directly inside the primary fire lanes of the Krell battle group. The Imperial cruisers fired instantly, their violet laser streams striking the lead human vessels. Vance gripped the console as the Iron Will took a direct hit. The outer composite plating cracked with a sharp explosion, fracturing into thousands of tiny shards that carried the thermal energy away from the primary hull. "The armor is holding," Marcus shouted from the secondary station. "The lateral dispersion worked." "Advance through the fire," Vance ordered. "Target their flagship." The human ships accelerated, ignoring all standard defensive safety margins. The railguns hummed. The lines locked. The slugs fired. 3-ton kinetic projectiles left the barrels at 3% the speed of light, cutting through the void without warning. The Krell command ship took 4 consecutive hits through its primary shield generator. The kinetic force did not melt the armor. It tore the entire front half of the battleship away from its engines, scattering debris across the orbital plane. Warlord Kalen watched his predictive models collapse into single digits on the Imperial flagship bridge. His jaw twitched as the human Vanguard ships executed erratic, high-risk strafe runs that completely invalidated the Imperial tactical algorithms. The surviving Krell vessels broke formation, initiating their first recorded retreat in 4 centuries. The space around Rim 7 went completely cold in 41 minutes. The defensive lines were shattered, but they were not broken by the enemy. The surviving Valen crews, watching the human pilots refuse to calculate acceptable losses, joined the advance and secured the borders of the sector. Vance opened the primary communications channel to transmit her final field report to High Command. The hegemony entered this sector expecting an auxiliary force, she spoke into the recorder. They are currently discovering a forge that has been sharpening its teeth for 10,000 years. Do not send diplomats, send engineers. Marcus walked across the bridge, his hands covered in dark soot. He tapped the main tactical console with his grease-stained steel crescent wrench, its notched handle resting against the new screens. We didn't just fix the frame, Captain. We made sure it holds together when the storm hits the engine room. Vance looked out the viewscreen at the distant stars, where the human vanguard vessels were already forming a perimeter around the broken blockade. They didn't just repair the hulls. They invited the galaxy into a war against the very concept of defeat. Down on the cold northern plains of Earth, the heavy iron forge below the mountain continued to hammer yellow steel into shape under the stars.